Well, hello, and thank you for watching. It's very kind of you. This is a recording of a speech I gave with most of the jokes taken out because they were relatively in-jokes, rounding up Techcon 2013. David Lloyd was the host of Techcon 2013. It's part of the Radio Academy's Radio Festival. It's the place where radio engineering and technology teams go to share new ideas. First, we heard from Alex Pride from the BBC in a keynote. I think it's the first keynote that we've ever had at Techcon. And it was a real welcome touch of realism for the day. She was talking about the importance of broadcast, and she announced the switch on of 162 new transmitters for the national BBC DAB multiplex. Alex reminded us that it took some time for FM to catch on, and when I looked at this a while ago I discovered it took 44 years for FM to overtake AM in the United States. 44 years, and we moan about low DAB and HD take-up. She told us to keep the faith in regard to broadcast radio. She also told us this figure. Breakfast time has 17 million people at peak listening to the radio at the same time. Now, 17 million people, if they were all streaming at 128k per stream, that's 2 terabits per second. She says that's the entire internet capacity of the UK, and we'd use all of that up just by streaming radio at breakfast time. Now, Alex didn't say how much it would cost to stream, so I went down to talk to one of the exhibitors at the Radio Academy's Radio Fair, and I asked them just how much it would be, assuming that each of those 17 million people were listening for just 15 minutes. So, if you streamed to 17 million people using Amazon CloudFront, it would cost you £145,000. That's 233,000 US dollars. If you streamed using SharpStream, which is the company I spoke to, it would cost $28,000. Oh, by the way, those figures are per day as well. £28,000, I should say. That's even more, of course, than $28,000. So the internet, it's the future, isn't it? Then Frank Melchior talked about quality. He gave us a really good definition of what quality is, and it's really good to hear that quality means different things for different people. Quality isn't just about the bit rate. The BBC World Service doesn't sound great on DAB, but it sounds all right. But the alternative is considerably worse quality because the alternative is switching it off. And any quality of content is better than no quality. That's what I say anyway. Then lots of people came and talked to us about mobile phones. This is a man from the mobile phone company here in the UK. It was very complicated. We got showed graphs like this. Hugely scary. You missed a cracker here, I tell you. We heard that 4G was really, really fast. I wondered whether 4G was really, really fast because nobody's using it. And I wondered what happened when people did. The answer came on Twitter. 5G apparently is the answer. Well, LTE looks really good for contributions. It looks really good for OBs and getting stuff into radio stations. But as for broadcasting radio, I'm not so sure, I have to say. We heard a lot about LTE broadcast. Now, LTE broadcast, also known as EMBMS, is a way of broadcasting stuff to mobile phones. Instead of a unicast internet stream, it's a way of broadcasting to mobile phones. Sounds really good. But how much would it cost? So I went to do another calculation. If you were to use 10% of all of the LTE spectrum for radio stations, you could fit about 30 radio stations in there. LTE spectrum, quite expensive. 3.6 billion US dollars it cost the mobile phone operators here in the UK when they bid for the spectrum. Now, if you work that out, as I'm sure you already have in your mind, you've already worked out that that's £7.5 million per radio station on there. That's an extra cost before any of the costs of transmission costs. And let us not forget, there are rather more LTE transmission masts in the UK than there are DAB or FM transmission masts. So was it any wonder why the mobile phone companies didn't talk about how much they want to charge radio stations to broadcast on LTE broadcast? Then we heard about the IET from Andrew Jones. Andrew argued that the IET is vital for keeping people up to date. It's important to keep people up to date in this world, he said, as after all, fixing EMT turntables or an errant cart machine isn't a skill that most people need these days. Then Anne Charles from the BBC, she's a project manager for BBC Radio, she talked about making studios more accessible. And I really like this. As she explained, radio studios that are accessible means they're more usable for everybody, which means better programs. And for many of us, that leads to more money as well. She played a great video of Manny Jasmi. Manny is a blind sports reporter for the World Service. He uses a radio studio just like the rest of us do. And we had this video of him using a radio studio. And when he pressed a button, the radio studio told him what button he'd pressed so that he knew that he'd pressed the right one. It was really heartwarming. A really good piece to end up seeing. Now, after lunch, it was time for some graphs. We were hearing about Loudness. This is Andrew Mason. He showed us some graphs. Simon Tuff, he showed us some graphs. And a man from Norway showed us his big sausage. This is Bjørn Arseth. He's from NRK, which is the Norwegian public service broadcaster. And he showed on this screen the dynamic range of a Dire Straits album at the top and a Maximo Park CD at the bottom. The Dire Straits CD, full of lovely dynamic range, as you can see, and the Maximo Park CD, just a big, maxed out green block of noise. The loudness war is harming music, they said. And my question is, given most of us deal with music, who's talking to the record companies to get them to stop? After that, a bunch of people, including Bauer's Tim Cockram here, a bunch of people who run technology in radio stations for a living, astonishingly voted that radio stations are a good thing and we shouldn't get rid of them, which was nice. Then we had a quick look back at radio history with David Lloyd. And then we had Jane Osler. Jane is the communications director at Digital Radio UK, and she outlined a consumer trial of DAB digital radio. They were measuring the impact of radio switchover on consumers. And the UK, as you probably know, is working towards an FM switch-off. In this trial in the city of Bath in the southwest of England, it was designed to follow the attitudes of radio listeners to this new technology. Really interesting report. You can find it online already. Really handy and interesting to have a look at. I think that's great marketing for outside of the industry. I have to say, I think marketing inside the industry is also needed. I show this slide a lot to people who work at radio stations. This shows how people are tuning in to radio right now. This is BBC Radio 5 Live, and this is total hours spent listening to 5 Live on all of the different ways that they broadcast. So first, here's AM, and you can see a slow decline, but it's still very important. Second, you can see DAB, you can see a slow rise, and DAB, of course, a very important part of 5 Live's future. Thirdly, radio listening through the television. And fourthly, blink and you'll miss it, radio listening through the internet as well. It's really surprising, I think, that we don't talk about this more to the rest of the radio industry, because the rest of the radio industry has to understand the benefits of broadcast as opposed to internet streaming and other new platforms. The entire radio industry has to be behind this, I think. Then we talked about the Raspberry Pi. Not this sort of Raspberry Pi, but this sort of Raspberry Pi. It's an amazing thing. It's a £25, $35 computer. This is James Adams from the Raspberry Pi Foundation showing us. And alongside James was Rashid Mustafa, who's a senior broadcast specialist from the UK broadcast regulator Ofcom. And he demonstrated a DAB multiplex that used this thing, the Raspberry Pi, to run multiplexer software for the broadcast. It's really, really cool. Really clever use of very, very cheap technology. I'd recommend two websites if you want to find out more. Media UK has a really interesting article about this. This is Radio 4matic. The man who put this together lives in Seattle. He put a Raspberry Pi inside an old Roberts radio, and he sets it to time delay the stream by 9 hours. So he wakes up to Radio 4, but wakes up to the Today programme on Radio 4 because it's sitting there time delaying the stream. Very cool. Comes home from for PM, and he desperately tries to avoid some unfunny Radio 4 comedy later on in the evening, just like the rest of us. And this website as well, Radio Dan. It's really cool. This you can find out more on the Next Radio website in the next couple of weeks. It's a complete set of scripts and code for the Raspberry Pi, which allows you to get all the code you need to write a programmable radio really, really simply. Well worth checking out. Finally, at Techcon 2013, a session on user experience, a highly important subject for studios and for audiences as well. And I've already been boring enough on this subject, so I won't bore you anymore on the user experience thing. And that was Techcon 2013. We then all went for a beer, and that's what I suggest you do too after watching this.